Hello there, this video is going to focus on Unit 5, Lesson 6, that's 5.06, the Push West. Fertile, sparsely populated, and rich in game, the West historically represented the future to Americans. By the 1840s, when editor John O'Sullivan insisted it was our manifest destiny to overspread and to possess the whole continent, he did not have to convince his countrymen. Many of them had already staked claims in the forested wilderness and looked forward to the day when their republic would stretch from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. And you saw this term in here, manifest destiny, and this is going to be an important term to remember from this time in history. And it is one of the goals for this lesson is to remember and explain and know what the term manifest destiny means. So we're going to be focusing on that as part of our lesson today, as well as identifying the major trails and the reasons for them and describe the experience of those who went west. And we're going to read pages 366 through 375. But first, let's take a glance at the reading guide. And the reading guide for this lesson is right here, and looking through it quickly, historical concept of manifest destiny, 2 major historical claims to Oregon by the United States. Here is a graphic to represent how fur traders and missionaries helped open up the West to settlement. We're going to be talking about the Oregon and Santa Fe Trail. Talking about settlements in California here with question 5, and the other settlement we'll be talking about in this reading is a settlement in Utah, Mormon settlement in Utah, and there's a graphic to fill out there as well. Okay, and then in the last part of this lesson is an up-and-close personal sheet, and that's also included there on this lesson answer key that I was showing you. And it's 2 different websites that you look at. They're diary entries from pioneers moving west, and it's just various information to read about. All right, so here we go. Let's begin first of all with let's find the pages, 366. So we go to our textbook, and where we left off from the prior lesson, there is one chapter that we're skipping. It's chapter 15, The Emergence of American Culture. And it's a chapter that is very interesting, and if you're interested in this stuff, I would certainly encourage you to, in your free time, look through it. But it talks about the development of, well, it says American culture in reading, or in literature, in art, in music, I think it talks about too, just the development of an American culture. And it's pretty interesting. It's some of the things you might cover in American Lit or in other classes as well. But we're skipping ahead then to chapter 16, which is Manifest Destiny. So let's get to our right page and begin reading for this lesson. So here we are, Manifest Destiny. In the age of Jackson, that's Andrew Jackson, President, American artists and writers celebrated the beauty and bounty of their nation, including the American frontier. Painters captured the majestic splendor of mountain peaks, forested wilderness, and vast prairies. In one of his lectures, Ralph Waldo Emerson noted with approval that the West was intruding a new and continental element to the national mind. After the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, which extended the territory of the United States from the Atlantic Ocean to the Rocky Mountains, Thomas Jefferson looked to the West as an empire for liberty. To antebellum Americans, and here's a good word for you to be aware of, antebellum. In American history, antebellum means before the Civil War, so before 1861. To antebellum Americans, the vast, sparsely populated land west of the Mississippi seemed ripe with possibility. Tens of thousands of settlers poured over the Appalachians into the Ohio River Valley, rapidly expanding the settled republic. As canals multiplied, railroads spread, and cities grew, many Americans looked ever farther westward to the Oregon country, to Texas, and to California. These lands were claimed by the British, Spain, and Mexico. They were inhabited by many American Indians, but such consideration mattered little to land-hungry Americans. Proud of their unique status as a democracy in a world mostly ruled by kings, many Americans saw themselves as part of a divine plan to expand freedom across the entire continent. As one congressman claimed, this continent was intended by Providence as a vast theater on which to work out the grand experiment of a republican government under the auspice of the Anglo-Saxon race. Other races, he seemed to imply, would have to step aside. And here's just a picture. Land-hungry Americans look west to lands already inhabited by Native Americans. Okay, Manifest Destiny is coming up in this paragraph here, so listen with open ears. In 1845, John L. O'Sullivan, a newspaper editor in New York, proclaimed that it was his countrymen's manifest destiny to overspread the continent allotted by Providence, Providence meaning God, for the free development of our yearly multiplying millions. By manifest destiny, he meant the country's clear and obvious fate. Americans increasingly saw the settlement of continental North America as their nation's right and calling. To those who favored American expansion, used the term manifest destiny to justify the relentless push westward. So manifest destiny, in summary, what it means is that it's the Americans' God-given right to spread across the continent from the Atlantic to the Pacific. That it was their right, it was their destiny by God to fulfill, to multiply and fill up the whole North American continent. Okay, this expansion did not go untested, of course. Spain, Mexico, and Britain were ready to fight for their land claims, and Native Americans took action as well. By 1848, however, the United States had purchased or won in war territories that extended the nation from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Yet even as the nation expanded, it felt the strains of increasing sectional tensions. And what does sectional tensions means? It means the North versus the South, and that could be summarized quite a bit by states' rights, the argument that the South had for states' rights, and including in that argument was, of course, slavery versus abolition, being against slavery. Okay, so the first area we're going to read about in this push west is the Oregon Country. Since the 1790s, Americans had their eyes on the sparsely settled regions called the Oregon Country. Oregon was a catch-all name encompassing the whole of the Pacific Northwest. So that region up there, Northwest, in my imaginary map, a region that today includes the states of Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, along with parts of Wyoming and Montana, and all the provinces of British Columbia and Canada. In the early 1800s, 4 countries laid claim to the region: Britain, Russia, Spain, and the United States. The British and Russians based their claims on early exploration and on trading posts they had set up in the region. For their part, the Americans asserted historical claims to the Oregon Country. As early as 1792, Robert Gray, an American mariner, had journeyed up the region's major river, which he named the Columbia. And in 1805, Lewis and Clark had explored the region and mapped the Columbia River. Fur trappers and mountain men. Although the British held the Oregon Country during the War of 1812, the region remained in dispute throughout much of the early 19th century. The small number of American pioneers who ventured that far west tended to settle south of the Columbia River, while British immigrants stuck to the north. Until the 1830s, the few Americans who journeyed over the Rockies were drawn mainly by the fur trade. At first, they bought beaver and animal pelts from local Native Americans and shipped them east. Later, they learned from the same Indians how to hunt beavers, whose soft, thick pelts were highly valued in the international market. In 1811, John Jacob Astor, the American businessman who would later become the nation's first multi-millionaire, founded an Oregon outpost, Astoria, from which his Pacific Fur Company operated. In the early days, the only way to ship the furs was by sea, on a long and expensive journey around Cape Horn. But in the 1820s and 1830s, some trappers and fur traders found new ways to move their goods back east by land. These mountain men, as they were called, were a colorful and cocky lot. Mike Fink, a famous fur trader, once bragged, "I can outrun, outdance, outjump, outdive, outholler, and outlick any white thing in the shape o' human that's ever put foot within 2,000 miles of the big old Mississippi." Fink was a hard-drinking man who made a sport out of shooting tin cups off the heads of his fellow trappers. And not always successfully when he was inebriated. The trapper and explorer who contributed most to blazing a trail across the continent was Jebediah Smith. Standing 6 feet tall with piercing blue eyes, Smith differed from the other rough-hewn mountain men. While most enjoyed the rowdy life, Smith, a devout Methodist, preferred to private Bible study. He did not smoke or drink, and he never married. A skilled map maker, Smith made an important find when he discovered the South Pass. This valley, which runs through the Rocky Mountains in present-day Wyoming, allowed for relatively easy passage across the Continental Divide. And here in this box, in North America, the Continental Divide, also called the Great Divide, is a natural boundary line. On one side of this line, rivers and streams flow to the Pacific Ocean, so over here. On the other side, they flow to the Atlantic Ocean or Gulf of Mexico, over there. In the United States, the Continental Divide follows the high rugged crest of the Rocky Mountains, which were very difficult for early pioneers to cross. Okay, now missionaries to Oregon. So we have basically, right now in this time period we're reading about, it was fur trappers and mountain men. But now we're going to read about the missionaries. The trails blazed by mountain men soon attracted would-be settlers. The earliest settlers included missionaries who wanted to convert the native people of the Pacific Northwest to Christianity. In 1834, a small band of Methodist missionaries made a historic overland journey from the east coast to Oregon's Willamette Valley. They were followed by a Presbyterian mission made up of two young married couples, Marcus and Narcissa Whitman and Henry and Eliza Spalding. For the Whitmans and the Spaldings, the journey to the Pacific Northwest was long and grueling. By the time they arrived in Oregon, the two couples had enough of each other, so they set up separate camps 100 miles apart and began their ministries. They found the Indians reluctant to convert. Early missionaries inadvertently introduced measles to the Pacific Northwest. Lacking immunity to the disease, many Native Americans died. Marcus Whitman, himself a physician, was unable to halt the epidemic. In November 1847, members of the Cayuse tribe, who resented both the new religion and the new disease, massacred the Whitmans and 13 other missionaries in eastern Oregon. After that, Protestant missionaries turned their attention to the waves of white settlers heading west. Okay, wagons west, the Oregon and Santa Fe trails. In the early 1840s, Oregon fever hit the United States. News of the abundance of land in the West spread quickly due to the improvements in transportation and communication, including canals, macadam roads, and the expansion of the cheap newspapers known as the penny press. The economic depression following the Panic of 1837 also motivated tens of thousands to flee economic uncertainty in the East and seek a brighter future in the West. That's always a motivation for people to move. When there's an economic slump, it's historically, that's really brought a lot of people blazing the trails to different areas. Now the Oregon Trail, and we're not talking about the old computer game, the Oregon Trail, but the real Oregon Trail. The first large migration started in 1843 when 120 covered wagons carrying nearly 1,000 pioneers set out from Independence, Missouri. They headed west on the route known as the Oregon Trail. The roughly 2,000-mile journey on the Oregon Trail spanned half a continent and often took 6 months to complete. That's a long trip. In a covered wagon called Prairie Sooners, pioneers forged their way through modern-day states of Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska, Wyoming, Idaho, and Oregon. From Missouri, the trail went west across the Great Plains, headed up the Platte River, and then to the South Pass through the Rocky Mountains. West of the Rockies, the trail followed river valleys to the fertile Willamette Valley in Oregon. Samuel Hancock, a hard-pressed Virginia farmer, was like many of the other emigrants. After reaching Independence, Missouri, he joined a train of more than 200 covered wagons. Along the way, they braved hailstorms and floods. They endured cholera and the loss of livestock. Just kind of skimming here, they also were frightened when Native Americans would come into the camp. They caused some stampedes. Okay, then did this paragraph here. When Hancock and his companions finally reached the Willamette Valley, the journey proved worth the struggle. Each of us, wrote Hancock, felt he had accomplished a great undertaking and had been exceedingly fortunate in surviving all the perils and exposure which they had been subjected. Everyone, too, seemed pleased with the country, presenting all the requisites of a rich and productive soil. Hancock and many others realized the aspirations of many Americans who saw westward expansion as a national destiny. By 1849, the writer Francis Parkman published an engaging account of his journey west. His popular book, The California and Oregon Trail, helped turn the steady trickle of emigrants into a flood. In all, between 1850 and 1860, more than 50,000 Americans settled in the Pacific Northwest. And we'll stop there and start part 2 shortly.